right, welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're doing something a little bit different, right? We're taking a whole bunch of sources that you listeners have sent in, and well, it's kind of a challenge. It's like a big puzzle.
Yeah, it is a bit of a grab bag. I mean, we've got everything from early right-wing radio to the Soviet nuclear program to Lawrence of Arabia, Oprah Winfrey. It's all over the place, but that's kind of the fun of it, right?
That's the whole point. We're going to try to find those connections. We're looking for those hidden links, the surprising insights you might not see when you look at these things separately. We're going to uncover how people gain influence, how manipulation works, and those weird times when even good intentions go totally sideways.
And you'd be surprised how often those themes pop up. How someone's trying to shape events and then, bam, the unintended consequences hit. History is full of those twists and turns.
Okay, so let's talk about shaping opinions. One of the sources is about Joe Pine, early right-wing talk radio, the 1950s. And his thing was, get this, he wanted to piss people off, make them mad. He thought that was good radio.
Oh yeah, Pine. He was definitely a provocateur. But the interesting thing is he wasn't always just shouting people down. Sometimes he would actually have these really thoughtful conversations with people he disagreed with. It wasn't always just for show. You know, Ben Shapiro, he's like the modern Joe Pine in some ways, but I don't see him doing that as much. Maybe that's why Pine was so successful.
Well, he was making serious bank. I mean, we're talking like 400 grand a year in today's money back in the late 50s. Must have been a good formula. He even said he made it big on TV, but the source couldn't really find any proof of that.
So much to the big TV star, huh?
Maybe it was just the right time, right place. Or maybe he was better at spinning the story than actually being on TV. It happens.
Okay, so from radio, we jump to the internet. Early internet. Curtis Yarvin, a.k.a. Mencius Moldbug.
Yeah.
Anyone heard of him? Well, he was like this really provocative online figure. He used slurs, made all these extreme statements that he was not joking. It's kind of like Pine, but online and way more intense. Yeah, Moldbug. He was a trip. And, you know, what's really interesting is that this whole style, all that shock and provocation, it actually resonated online, especially with this younger, tech-savvy crowd. He was like a prototype for the alt-right, using irony, pushing boundaries to sneak in these really radical ideas.
And get this, Peter Thiel, the big tech guy, was one of his early supporters, gave him money. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's a head-scratcher, isn't it? What was Thiel's angle? Was he just fascinated by Yarvin's ideas, or did he see something else, some kind of potential? And there's this phrase of Yarvin's that the source mentions, overcoming dictator phobia. It's kind of creepy in retrospect, considering some of the stuff that's been going on in politics lately.
It's like he was predicting it or something. All right, let's switch gears. Dr. Laura Schlesinger, more mainstream, but still super conservative and very, very direct. Gave it to you straight. The source says she really connected with people who felt like traditional values were going down the drain. She was like this moral authority figure, kind of like Jordan Peterson in a way.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. People are drawn to that. The need for someone to tell them what's right and wrong. Dr. Laura, Peterson, it's the same kind of appeal. People are looking for answers, for someone to make sense of the world.
Okay, so let's talk about unintended consequences. Stuff that backfires, even if it starts with good intentions. Like, think about the Soviet atomic bomb. We all know they got it, but did you know they pretty much copied the American design? They had spies, they got the blueprints. I mean, it's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, you got to consider what was going on back then. The Cold War was heating up. From their point of view, they saw America with the bomb and thought, we need one too.
Yeah.
A deterrent, right? They weren't going to just sit there and wait.
Then there's Lawrence of Arabia. The guy was a legend, right? He helps the Arabs capture Damascus, but then it gets handed over to the French. What a betrayal. And this whole thing was fueled by Lowell Thomas, who basically created this super romanticized version of Lawrence, turned him into this global celebrity.
Oh yeah, Thomas was a master storyteller. But that's kind of the irony, right? He makes Lawrence famous, but it ends up undermining Lawrence's goals. And then there's the Balfour Declaration. The British promise a Jewish homeland in Palestine, which on one hand is part of this big, complex historical narrative, but it also shows how empires use promises and manipulate situations for their own ends. They didn't really care what would happen to the Arabs in the long run.
And speaking of manipulation, we have Oprah. It's fascinating. You know, she starts with that whole trash TV style, all about the drama, but then she shifts to this focus on trauma and personal stories. Was it genuine or just a good business move? Who knows?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but the thing is she had this huge audience. And when she started talking about things like child abduction, sex trafficking, it created this atmosphere of fear, even though crime rates were actually going down. That's the thing about media. It has this power to shape how we see the world. And then there's Oprah's own story, her childhood trauma. It's powerful, it connects with people, but the source mentions that there are some inconsistencies in how she's told it over the years. It makes you wonder about the line between personal truth and creating a compelling narrative.
And that's the thing, right? People love a good story. And sometimes they want it to be true so badly that they don't even question it. It's like that whole thing about the liberal media in Germany before the Nazis took over. They were so focused on this idea of normalcy. They didn't want to rock the boat.
Yeah.
They kind of downplayed how dangerous the Nazis actually were. They treated them like just another political party.
It's a classic case of underestimating the threat. They thought if they ignored it, it would just go away. Big mistake. And it's a lesson for us today, right? We can't be naive. We have to be able to recognize real danger when we see it.
All right, let's get into some seriously dark stuff. Power, control, manipulation. Beria. Talk about ruthless. This guy was Stalin's right-hand man. He ran the secret police, crushed any dissent, killed anyone who got in his way. And he wasn't just following orders, he was ambitious. He wanted to be top dog.
He was terrifying. And he was smart. He knew how to play the game. He built up this cult of personality around himself, even though he was always walking on eggshells with Stalin. It's crazy. And then after Stalin dies, what does Beria do? He starts releasing political prisoners, bans torture. It's like he was trying to reinvent himself, but it was too late.
Talk about a mixed legacy. Okay, a different kind of manipulator. Eugene Talmadge, the Georgia governor, he played this redneck persona to the hilt. He knew exactly who his audience was and what they wanted to hear.
He was a master of playing to his base. And he was cynical. He knew that people like to think of themselves as honest and straightforward, so he used that to his advantage. He would even say things he knew weren't true, just because he knew it would resonate with his supporters, like his opposition to X-ray clinics. He probably knew they were beneficial, but he played to those rural fears about germs and technology, purely for votes.
It's all about power, right? Control the narrative, control the people. Okay, back to Peter Thiel. Early career, driven, didn't want to wait his turn, went into finance, then tech. He even co-wrote a book called The Diversity Myth.
Yeah, Thiel's always been a fascinating figure. He's clearly brilliant, but also very ideologically driven. He seems to see the world in very stark terms, us versus them. And he's always looking for ways to disrupt the status quo. Sometimes for good, sometimes, well, who knows.
And then there's the government getting in on the manipulation game, the whole UFO thing, the CIA, DIA, they were spreading disinformation, fake stories about aliens to test security protocols. Can you believe it?
It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But it just shows how far they were willing to go. And in some cases, they really mess with people's lives. This Paul Benowitz guy, they basically drove him crazy with all their fake alien stories. Yeah. It's really disturbing.
All right, let's talk about exploitation. Thomas Jefferson, the great American hero, right? But he also owned slaves.
Yeah.
And not just owned them. He had a nail factory that was run by enslaved children.
Yeah, it's hard to reconcile those two images, isn't it? The champion of liberty and the slave owner. But that's the reality of American history. And Jefferson, he tried to justify it. Said the slaves were happy, that they owed him a debt. He even designed his home, Monticello, in a way that kind of hid the reality of slavery. Out of sight, out of mind.
It's like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. And then you have Rio Tinto, the mining company. They were operating in apartheid South Africa and Namibia, running a uranium mine that was basically a concentration camp. The conditions were horrific. Black workers treated like animals.
It's a dark side of capitalism, right? Profits over people. And it wasn't just Rio Tinto. Lots of companies profited from apartheid. It's a stain on history.
Okay, buckle up. This is a tough one. Joseph Kentler. He was this German psychologist who had some really disturbing ideas about childhood sexuality. He said that sexual liberation was the key to preventing another Auschwitz.
Yeah, Kentler. Really controversial. His theories were way out there. He thought kids should be exposed to nudity, even pornography. It's hard to even talk about it. It's so disturbing. But it was part of this whole post-war thing in Germany, trying to break away from the past, but maybe going too far in the other direction.
It's a pendulum swing, and sometimes it swings way too far. Okay, another case of exploitation, the Chagos Islanders. They were forcibly removed from their homes by the British and American governments, all so they could build a military base. Talk about callous.
Yeah, that was a real tragedy. They were just kicked off their land, no regard for their culture, their history, and they're still fighting to go back. It's a reminder that these kinds of injustices are still happening today.
All right, last few examples. Ambition, legacy, distortion, the Kennedy family, political dynasty, big dreams. And then there's RFK Jr. He was known for being a bit of a wild child, and the source even hints that he might have had some darker secrets.
Yeah, it's always tricky when you're born into that kind of fame and privilege. The pressure must be immense. And sometimes it leads people down some strange paths.
Then there's Thomas Kinkade, the painter, those super sentimental landscapes. He actually saw himself as an artist with a social mission. He even compared himself to Andy Warhol, which is kind of funny. I doubt Warhol would have approved.
It's like he was trying to elevate his art to a level it maybe didn't reach. But hey, everyone's entitled to their own interpretation.
And then there's Kent Hovind, the young Earth creationist. He got in all sorts of trouble, domestic violence, tax evasion, but he seemed to get away with a lot for a long time. Makes you wonder if there's a double standard when it comes to religious figures.
Yeah, it's a good question. Why do some people seem to get a pass while others get thrown the book?
Okay, let's wrap this up. Power of narrative. The shooting of Tupac Shakur. Everyone immediately blamed Biggie and Diddy. It was this whole East Coast, West Coast thing. But was there ever any real proof?
Yup. But it was a good story, and people ran with it.
Then you have Newt Gingrich writing an alternate history novel where the Waffen-SS invades Tennessee. I mean, talk about a wild imagination.
Hey, sometimes you gotta let your imagination run wild, right? Maybe he was just trying to make a point about American vulnerability or something.
And lastly, Bruno Bettelheim. He had this theory about autism called the empty fortress theory. Basically blamed parents, especially mothers, for their kids' autism. Totally discredited now, but it shows how much damage a bad idea can do when it comes from someone in authority.
It's a cautionary tale. We have to be critical thinkers, question everything, especially when it comes to stuff like this. All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. What do you make of all this?
It's a lot to process, that's for sure. But I think the main takeaway is that influence and manipulation, they're everywhere. In politics, media, even in our personal lives. And it's up to us to be aware of it, to recognize the signs.
Right. Don't just take things at face value. Think for yourself. Question everything.
Exactly. And for all you listeners out there, we want to hear from you. Go back to the sources, dig in, see what you find. Maybe you'll discover something we missed. That's the beauty of this. It's an ongoing conversation.
Oh.
All right, that's it for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.